Hey, what's up, guys? Matt here, coming to you from Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson. We're going to be talking about another motorcycle today, here with Nick Culver, my co-worker here and co-podcaster. And today we're going to be talking about the Sportster S. And the Sportster S first came out in the 21 model year, a few months after the Pan America came about. And the Sportster S was Harley-Davidson's first Sportster on the Revolution Max platform, but the second bike in Harley-Davidson's lineup on the Revolution Max platform. And the Sportster S was the bike that kind of kicked off this brand new kind of revolution and huge change in the Sportster world, with completely changing what was the Air-Cooled Evolution engine that we had for close to 30 years, I think is what it was. And Harley-Davidson took a completely new direction, I should say, with a brand new generation motor and platform. You know, the Rev Max is a stressed member, a lot lighter, puts out a lot more power, and a lot more technology now.
Yeah, it's I think one of the things that they talked about in a lot of the press releases back when they were announcing it was just kind of the idea of putting the sport back in Sportster. You know, when the Sportster originally came out in the marketplace, it was a genuine performance bike. It was honestly like kind of a giant killer in certain ways. They kind of wanted to bring it back to its roots a little bit, and make it a genuinely fast bike. And the Sportster S was kind of, as you mentioned, kind of the first of the Rev Max Sportsters, and it also still to this day is the fastest of the Rev Max Sportsters. Makes, like you said, I think you mentioned like 120 horsepower and good amount of torque. Has variable valve timing like the Pan America. And we wanted to take a look at the bike for this new model year, just not because it received any massive changes, but just because its position has changed in the lineup. There's no more air-cooled sporties. Obviously, they've gone away. And some of the bikes in the Softail lineup have either changed price point, or there's been new bikes added like the ST. Sport touring and sporty bikes in general in the Harley lineup have become increasingly favored by riders, whether it's a bagger or a Softail. This is the sportiest of sporties, so I decided to be a cool bike to take a look at. And it's also a bike that I didn't have a lot of experience on. I haven't really ridden a lot. When we did the review of it originally, actually I say we, but it was basically Matt, because you were at a press launch for the bike, which was pretty cool that you were able to go to that. But it also meant that I didn't get to ride the bike until months after you had ridden it, and it was just cool to be able to get some seat time on it, because it's not really, I don't think, a bike that would be designed to go after someone in your demographics. I mean, obviously you're probably too tall for the bike on average, and then also just you're mostly riding on longer rides. Whereas I think this bike's geared a little bit more towards a younger commuter, smaller guy that's maybe second, third bike into his bike ownership, and doesn't plan to do a whole lot of touring and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You mentioned the power, and it has the 1250cc. The other two Sportsters that are in the lineup have the 975. So it's clearly the one that has the most power, 120 horsepower, like you said, 94 foot-pounds of torque. And yeah, I would agree with you 100%. Not the bike that I would choose as my first bike, just because it doesn't fit me very well. But at the same time, it does have forward controls, and I was pretty comfortable on it. We took it up Highway 2 Angeles Crest, and I had a blast on it. But I think it's very fitting and suiting that you ride it, because you have so much experience on the Pan America now, and you can really get a good idea of, okay, how exactly does this bike compare to the Pan America, because you do have a lot of experience with the Revolution Max engine. And
I think that's a good place to jump in. If you're looking at the Rev Max bikes, and if you're looking at the Sportster S in particular, I think the first thing you kind of have to talk about is the engine, because like most Harleys, it's the star of the show, but the engine's so important to the character of the bike, and this is a radical departure from the previous sporties, but I think in most regards a good way, depending on what you're after. So as you mentioned, 1250cc, double overhead cam, variable valve timing, lots of horsepower, but also lots of torque. Unlike the Pan America, it's tuned for more mid-range and bottom-end torque. It's supposed to be kind of stoplight to stoplight in terms of how it delivers power. And I was actually really surprised by how different the power delivery was, and even just things like the sound from the Pan America. It definitely comes on earlier. You don't have to rev it out nearly as much to get the power out of it. And it's probably a combination of that and, honestly, unless you have an absolutely bone stock Pan Am that has absolutely nothing on it, it's probably a good 100 pounds lighter than the Pan Am. And so that and the additional torque means it's properly quick. The spec sheets say that the Pan Am has 30 more horsepower, but it doesn't feel like that at all. This bike, especially, getting onto the freeway, feels quicker than the Pan Am.
Yeah, around town. Like if you're under 70 miles an hour, the Sportster S feels like it's a faster bike all day long. Yeah, because you're getting up to, every time you shift the gear or every time you go to a stop and you take off, it feels like that Sportster S has a lot more power. to your point too, like most people when they get on the Pan America, they have luggage, things like that. And the Pan America, I believe, is like 570 pounds. This bike wet is 500 pounds.
Yeah.
So all it takes is 30 pounds of luggage or panniers or whatever on the Pan America, and you're 100 pounds lighter.
Yeah, if you go with a beefier skid plate and you go with the luggage mounts, even without the luggage, you're probably pretty much there.
It adds up quick. Yeah, like both of our bikes are, fully equipped.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
They're easily a 600-pound motorcycle at this point.
And so, yeah, like, I think the engine is always going to be an important part of anyone's purchase decision. And I think the Sportster S really shines in that department in a way that the old Sportsters had a real charisma. But I think that, unless you did a lot of modifications and you really hopped them up, they lacked a little bit of excitement for people. We had a lot of guys coming back 4, 5, 6 months later after buying, especially 883s, but even sometimes the 1200s, and going, I feel like I'm outgrowing it. And then going up to something like the Street Bob, and getting into a big twin, because they just want that. They want a little bit more excitement. The Sporties had the charm and the personality, but I don't think that they always backed it up with the performance side of things. And I think Harley recognized that, and the 1250 obviously does not suffer from that. There's not a bike in the lineup that you can switch to that's going to give you more exciting power delivery than the Sportster S.
100%.
And obviously that's going to be a central facet to that bike. You even just look at the bike, and other than a set of wheels, it's basically just an engine, and it just looks like an engine surrounded by 2 wheels, which it gives it a really cool aesthetic. But in addition, it's a pretty friendly motor too. You can put it in rain mode and you can ride around on it. It's because of the variable valve timing. It's not peaky. It's not like a 600cc bike where you're winding it out, nothing, and then you're spinning up your rear tire. So it does have a very cruiser focused character to it as well, because it's very forward facing in its power. You can tune it down a little bit with the rain mode, but if you put it into sport mode, it hits hard and it hits fast.
So one of the things that Harley-Davidson talked a lot about when this bike was first introduced was the fact that they wanted to make a Sportster that was visually striking and just completely different than anything they'd really ever built in the history of the motor company. Things like the really fat tires, has really fat stance on it. You've got the high mount exhaust that was really inspired by the flat trackers. Got this real high mount exhaust on there. And you got the pill-shaped headlight as well, which is a part that is unique to that bike as well. And so you have a lot of these features and parts and things like that we've never seen on any bike, prior to that. And when you see that motorcycle, there's really no question as to exactly what model it is. So I know Harley-Davidson, they wanted to make a big splash when they introduced the brand new Sportster platform. And I think they did that in a really big way. It's not really your traditional Harley-Davidson, so I think it appeals to a certain person. But, and then when they came out with the Nightster and the Nightster Special now, that was a little bit more of a traditional Harley-Davidson that looks a little bit closer to like the Iron 883. But the Sportster S is something that visually is completely different than anything in the lineup.
It's a really unique bike, and I think you're exactly right. I think they wanted a very striking bike to unveil the new Sportster family. And overall, I think the aesthetics of the bike are really cool. There's a few things here and there that we kind of nitpick visually, but I think the headlight's really cool. I think that the chunky tire front and rear really gives it this just kind of beefy muscle cruiser look. The swing arm's really pretty. The engine itself is just really nice. It's got that kind of unique chocolate finish on it. That's something that I wish they had made a Pan Am at some point with that, just to kind of mix up the engine colorings of the Pan Am, because all of them have just been that kind of gray. But it kind of shows the versatility of the Rev Max engine, because that's something that every Sportster now has a slightly different look to the engine, just like the old Evo motors, whether it was an Iron 1200, an 883, or even something like a 48. They all had slightly different configurations on which parts were chrome and which parts were wrinkle and gloss. And so it's cool that they're playing around with those engine finishes, because I think the chocolate looks really, really good on the Sportster S. And it's got a really long, low slung look to it. It just looks fast, just kind of sitting there.
Very muscly.
Yeah.
Like a muscle bike, which it is. So it's very suiting for the style that it is.
Yeah. I think the only downside to it visually is that to make it look so unique, they've made a lot of parts on it obviously bespoke to that bike. And while the original Sportsters were extremely customizable, I think that it's taken a little bit longer for the aftermarket to warm up to this particular bike, because, let's say you want to design a new headlight for this bike. Well, you're going to have to make a new bracket for it. It doesn't just have the same bucket that every Sportster has had since the beginning of time to plug in there. And so I think that while they definitely achieved that really unique look, they made kind of also a bike that's kind of niche in its appearance, where, if you really like it, awesome, and it's kind of probably already set up exactly how you want it. But if there's something about it that you don't like, it's a little bit more difficult to change than it would be on one of the old Evo Sporties. And that's something that'll probably change over time a little bit. And there's always been certain models that are a little bit more pigeonholed than others, but I feel like the Sportster S is definitely one of those ones where it's like, this is, you can do some things to customize it, change the ergonomics. Obviously there's all sorts of different parts from Harley, but for the overall aesthetic, it's going to remain the same unless you spend a lot of money and a lot of time and have stuff custom made for it, because most of what's available is going to be ergonomics related and or like luggage, comfort focused kind of stuff like windshields and stuff. So
yeah, definitely not a bolt up part friendly bike. No. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, even things like the really cool exhaust being routed up like a tracker, well, painted portion that comes up over the muffler.
Heat guard.
Yeah. Beautiful, painted, it's color matched, no real complaints there, except for that if you want to get an exhaust, right, well, or if a company wants to design an exhaust for it, they're going to have to take that into account, and that's just going to make it more difficult. If that had been two-piece and you were able to detach that, so you can make the tail section just a single piece, and you could remove that, and then you could run a low exhaust without it looking like there was a vacant hole up top. So there was things they could have done that would have made it a little bit more friendly for customization and mods. But I think that they had a vision for the bike, and I think they nailed it. I think overall it's a really good looking bike. Fit and finish on it is definitely better than like the Pan America, but I think that there's still things about it, fit and finish wise, that don't match up to the old Sportster, which I can excuse a little bit more on like the Nightster. They're trying to hit that lower price point, but on the Sportster S, it's a little frustrating to see some of the fit and finish not match the old thing. They went to the trouble, for example, of doing a beautiful aluminum gas tank. A lot of brands will go to plastic to save money and save weight, especially on a bike that you can say is performance focused like the Sportster. But they did a beautiful aluminum gas tank, but then there's a piece of plastic on the gas tank, that's unpainted. It's just kind of a weird contrast in my opinion. But
yeah, and I mean, Harley-Davidson's known for its fit and finish.
Yeah.
And the Sportster family definitely falls within that classification of, a cruiser. And so Harley-Davidson cruisers have always been about, the fit and finish being top tier. And you're right, they have a great gas tank, the aluminum gas tank, 3.1 gallon, by the way. Just one more reason why it's not really your touring focused bike. But and the shape is cool. It's new. It's a little bit more forward thinking, like modern looking with modern lines, as opposed to like the real gradual, soft teardrop lines that we've seen so many times in the past. But yeah, to your point as well, we're talking about $16,999 for the bike as the base MSRP on a billiard gray one. So $17,000. I think for $17,000, yeah, you want it really fast, which definitely achieves that, and you want the fit and finish to be really good as well, which I think is there. But to your point, there's also a couple little things that maybe you take a little bit of a step back when you compare it to the old air-cooled Evo motors.
Yeah, or even like I think another comparison would be like the old V-Rod. You got the performance, but the fit and finish on the V-Rod was top indistinguishable from the traditional cruisers as well.
Totally.
And that's kind of how I feel the bikes should be. And so, I get they're trying to hit a weight that the V-Rod was unable to hit, but you've already got an aluminum tank. You don't need to put plastic on it, especially dead center. I don't mind if there's plastic somewhere else, but if it's something that's always in my line of sight, I want it metal or I want it painted, but I'm annoying like that.
Well, the switch housings too, right?
The switch housings, and I go back and forth on that because, obviously there's some functionality with the navigation, and I think that's a good time to get into the electronics of this bike. It does share some of the electronics off of the Pan Am. I'd say that's probably the closest thing other than like the electronic suspension, but your gauge has a lot of the same functionality that the Pan America has. So, and in addition, you have ride modes, and you've got 6-axis IMU, you've got traction control. So I get, they need a lot of buttons, but on the Pan Am, I think it makes sense to have plastic controls that are less expensive because there's a high chance you might have to replace those if you tip over. On the Sportster S, though, I think that they could have gone with maybe the same controls that were on the old touring bikes. Those were metal. They had joysticks so you can navigate through menus. I can't imagine that there's a huge amount of weight to be saved there, and it just would have added to, I think, the very premium aesthetic. I think if you're going to change something to plastic, it should be either out of sight or something you don't touch, and if you're touching it all the time, then I think it makes sense to invest in that. If you're seeing it all the time and you're touching it all the time, I think they talk about that in the automotive world all the time, touch points, anything that you contact, anything that you see, that's where you want to avoid cutting corners if you can. And then anytime else, anything that's out of sight doesn't matter as much. So, and I go back and forth, because like I said, on the Pan Am, I know they need that functionality there, but I think that there was a way to do it without having to go to plastic controls.
Yeah. To your point, 4-inch color TFT screen. I think that looks really good, by the way. Just the fact that it's a circular gauge, it has like that retro look a little bit, But at the same time, when you look at the screen, it's a very modern, up-to-date screen that gives you a lot of the information that you need. And I think it looks very sporty as well.
It does. And something I want to give Harley big props to is things that like the automotive world usually gets horribly wrong. They got really right with that gauge. Oftentimes you'll see like bezels way too big on bikes, you know. So I mean, the Pan Am, I give it, you know, some leeway because it's an adventure bike, so it's okay if it looks rugged. But you know, there's like an inch of plastic around the Pan Am bezel, right? And if you get on the GS, there's like an inch of just dead space around where the screen is, you know. And you know, the manufacturers use it to have like warning lights and that kind of stuff, but like they don't need that. It's just because getting a bezel-less screen or putting it in a unique shape is more difficult, right? Because you want to be able to just go to a screen supplier and order 400,000 9x8 screens, and that's the cheapest way to do it. Well, on the Sportster S, you've got an irregularly shaped screen, and you want really small bezels. Now, that's really expensive to do properly, but it really changes the look of the bike. Because I've seen other bikes that have like even just like really like cheesy stuff, you know, where you have like a square screen put into a round hole. Yeah. It's like, oh, I couldn't buy the bike. I'd be like, nope, sorry, can't do it, you know, can't do it, right? Like,
not everybody notices these details either.
No, but
until
like
until you see a circular screen and a circular, you know, bezel, then you appreciate the fact that those details.
And if you're going to charge me $16.99, right, then I want to notice those details. I want to appreciate those details.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think that's one of the ways that Harley really showed that, you know, this is something they know you're looking at all the time. They know that it needs to look really good. It's bright. It's got a lot of functionality. It works really, really well. And it doesn't change or mess up the traditional aesthetic of the bike. You know, it would have been so easy to just be like, well, it's a high-tech bike. Let's just put a rectangle TFT screen on there and we'll make it look nice. You know, put a piece of glass over it, just like we did on the Livewire. It would have been so easy for that. But it would have kind of ruined the cruiser vibe and aesthetic. So I'm really glad that they went with the trouble of getting that screen.
You know, one of the main criticisms when this bike first came out and people saw all the pictures and immediately started jumping to conclusions was the fact that the tires are very wide. You got a 180 millimeter tire in the back. It's a 16-inch wheel. And you got a 17-inch wheel. It's a 160 millimeter, you know, wide tire in the front. So when you're talking about a bike that they're selling you as a performance bike on paper, you might think like, wow, those are really fat tires for what should be like this, you know, really ultra high performance, putting the sport back into Sportster bike, you know. And I rode it and I was very impressed and very surprised at just how nimble that bike was, even with the tire dimensions. And some people attribute it to just the shape of the tire in the front, kind of has a little bit more of a peaky shape to it. But I felt like it was really good in terms of carving the canyons. We went up Highway 2, which is one of the most popular roads in Southern California where the sport bike guys go up and just do all kinds of crazy things where they think they're out on Laguna Seca. But what were your first impressions of riding the bike?
They were, I think, very similar to yours. You know, I think I'm always skeptical of big tire bikes, you know, especially big front tires, like something that's like, you know, like the Fat Boy. The Fat Boy hides it pretty well, but you're under no illusions when you're on the Fat Boy that you have a big tire up there. You know, you have a big tire. I could have probably forgotten about it on the Sporty S. I was more fixated on the ride on just like the ergonomics, and that's honestly probably the best compliment I could give such a large tire in the front is I just didn't even think about it. You know, it handled very naturally. It didn't feel like it really wanted to push wide in the corners. I didn't feel like I was having to muscle it in. You know, the whole bike's very light, very responsive. That chassis, I mean, you know, the engine being a stressed member, I mean, it's really rigid, stiff. It does exactly what the suspension wants it to do. And honestly, the only time I thought about the tires was when we were going down the freeway and the ride quality wasn't what I was expecting it to be. You know, I think I've read a lot of the reviews and a lot of people have commented on the suspension travel being quite short. You know, you hit a big bump, you're going to feel it, don't get me wrong, but you know, that big chunky tire up front with all that sidewall, it actually really improves the ride comfort dramatically. And the same thing with the rear tire. And so that combined with the fact that the suspension's quite adjustable, you know, you've got adjustment in the front and you've got adjustment in the rear. I was able to quickly take preload out of the rear, which is important because, you know, I'm a relatively small guy, and the bike doesn't seem to be like oversprung. You know, the baggers, you know, they're trying to compensate for the fact you don't have a huge amount of travel, and you might ride two up, and you might have a bunch of gear, and so you put me on there with no passenger, no gear, and it's just I don't weigh enough for the suspension to work properly.
There's no give at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas on this bike, even though it's got a lot less travel than the bagger, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say a lot less, but it's got less travel than the bagger, I can actually get some noticeable sag, which I can't do on a bagger. So overall, I was actually really impressed with how it rode down the freeway, because the 10 freeway is not, it's better than it has been historically, but it's not
It's not flat.
I wasn't really bugged by it, and I'm like a total spoiled brat when it comes to suspension now because of the Pan Am. You know, it's like if I feel anything, I'm going to be upset. And
You
honestly,
notice it.
yeah, honestly, I would have been fine. So I was pretty impressed. I'd say that overall chassis is really good. It's pretty darn comfortable for the kind of rides that you're planning to do on it. If you're buying this bike, you know, you're probably not planning to tour across country on it. So, you know, if you're thinking you're going to be doing hour-long stints on the bike max, you know, between gas stops, which is probably what you're going to be doing, and maybe 2 to 3 hours over the course of the day maximum, you know, it's going to be pretty comfortable for that as long as you can get the ergonomics dialed for you. I found the forward controls to be a little too far forward for me personally, especially on that kind of bike. You know, I kind of wanted the comfort of the mid controls because I'm a short guy. I'll come out and say it. But I think if you get it dialed in, you know, the chassis, the engine, everything's suitable for riding easily 2-3 hours a day. And for that kind of bike with no wind protection, you know, that's, I think, the maximum you would want to do on that anyways. You know, that's it's kind of a rip around bike. That's what it was designed for.
It's a day ripper for sure. And as long as we're talking about comfort, we might as well talk about the seat too.
Yeah.
And I think the seat, the priority there was to make it look like these flat trackers. You know, you don't have this big pillow up there, and it's one of these seats where you can kind of slide around and shift your weight, you know, through the turns and things like that. And
slide off the back too if you're not careful.
There's that too. But yeah, it wasn't particularly, you know, comfortable for me, but it wasn't particularly uncomfortable either.
Yeah.
You know, I felt like, you know, going up the canyon, it was what I expected out of that bike, you know, and for the use case and what it's intended to do, I thought it was fine. I thought it was great. And I wouldn't want to see some big pillowy seat on that bike anyways.
No.
So
they do make in the parts and accessories catalog like a sundowner, I think, or a hammock. I can't remember which variety
probably
of
a
comfort.
sundowner.
Seat, but they do have a nice one that's upgraded, you know, if you want to spend more time in the saddle. But I didn't notice anything on our test ride, and it's about as long as my commute, and I feel more discomfort on my naked bike than I do on the Sportster S when it comes to butt comfort. So I would only probably go that direction if I was planning to do, you know, day trips here and there if I wanted to use it. Because, you know, with a windshield and proper ergonomics and that sundowner seat, you could put a little tail bag on there and you could easily go to Death Valley from here and not be too upset about it. I think for what it needs to do, it's good. I just felt like I did feel kind of like I didn't feel in the bike. I felt sitting up on top of it, which is funny because of how low the bike is. So I was kind of expecting more to feel like I was in it. But with that seat being so flat, you don't really feel like you're in it, in a seat. You definitely feel like you're on it.
I think it's funny though. When we talk about Harley-Davidsons, we always have to talk about the touring capabilities of the bike.
Yeah.
And really, like, no, I don't think any other manufacturer you really like, okay, well, this is a sport bike, but how good of a tour is
How
this?
well does my R6 do on day trips?
Right.
Yeah.
People don't even have that conversation.
No.
And honestly, I don't even think that conversation needs to be had with the Sportster S because if you're buying a Sportster S, you're not going on these out-of-town long trips.
But it does have some nice comfort features like cruise control, and you can put a windshield on it, and they do have a little tail bag,
true.
and, you know, so
That's true.
I think it's one of those things where, you know, this might be the guy who's like, I want an R6, but I don't want to hate my life every time I'm on it, and I want something that's more street focused. I want kind of a naked sport bike, but I just hate the way all the naked sport bikes these days look like alien bikes, you know, unless you go really high end and get something that's, you know, a little bit pricier. So, you know, I mean, like pretty much everything from all your competitors are they just look high strung, and then a lot of the engine configurations are just not that fun in the sport bike market right now. It's a lot of parallel twins, and especially in the middleweight category. And then when you get to the bigger categories, it's a lot of inline fours and V4s, which are cool. But if you want a V twin, you know, there's not a huge number of those on the market right now. And especially if you don't want an insectoid looking one.
Right.
So, you know, suddenly then you're looking at a Harley when you might not have otherwise thought you were.
True.
So
yeah,
I think it's a really cool bike, positioned really, really well. It's a lot of fun to ride, wickedly fast. There's a few, you know, fit and finish things here and there that we talked about that kind of bug me and irk me a little bit, but that's true of every bike because I'm just kind of a psycho about that kind of stuff. And
it's fair. You're a Harley guy, and until your expectations are there, and
you know,
that's fair.
But I think that my biggest gripe is it's really good, but it's kind of niche, and it makes me really want them to expand the Sportster S lineup. You know, it makes me really want the Bronx. All right, so I want to apologize for the change of costume midway through this. I really should be apologizing to Matt because I didn't make sure that my runtime on the camera was less than 30 minutes. So we're reshooting part of this. We got most of the way through, so we kind of just need to conclude the bike for the most part. But there was a couple things I remembered that I wanted to talk about that I think that Harley needs to get some credit for on the bike as well that I didn't mention. I think first and foremost, the brakes are really good on the bike. Not only do they have good feel and offer good stopping power, but Harley didn't skimp, and they didn't skimp on the Nightsters as well. And it's kind of a general trend that they've been going in with most of the bikes now, and the baggers are included in this as well, that they're doing not only Brembo calipers, but they're doing Brembo master cylinder, and they're doing that both front and rear. So you're getting that premium braking experience both with your front and rear brakes.
Yeah, I think the last point that I wanted to make too is that this bike, and I've mentioned this before, but I think it's important to really highlight this, is Harley-Davidson's one of their main objectives when they were launching this new Sportster Rev Max platform and replacing the Sportster as we knew it. They wanted to make this bike extremely impactful. A lot of what's on this bike, things like what we've talked about already, the high mount exhaust, the light, the wheels on this motorcycle are all unique to the Sportster S. And there aren't too many bikes out there in competitive brands and makes that really match up in terms of style with the performance on this bike. And so it really is kind of a unique motorcycle, not just in Harley-Davidson's lineup, but in the whole, motorcycle universe. And so if you're looking for something that's fast, performs well from braking to engine, and you want something that's very identifiable out on the road, then this bike is a really good option for you.
Yeah, it's instantly recognizable for what it is. It's got a really unique character in addition to its visuals. It's got a really potent motor, handles really, really well. You can set it up to be pretty comfortable, or you can kind of leave it in its muscle cruiser vibe. And so it's a little bit more versatile than I would have initially assumed, although it's still a little bit limited by how bespoke it is. It's a strength and a weakness to have so many unique parts, just because a lot of things that might be otherwise swappable and shareable between two models, as soon as you start making more and more things bespoke, you run into more and more problems when you try to modify it and that kind of stuff. But on the flip side, usually when something's so unique and one-off, for the people that it hits really hard, and they really like it, so they don't feel the need to change too many things.
Yeah, when Harley-Davidson came out with their Nightster platform, the big thing was they hired like 6 different custom builders from around the world that all kind of gave it their custom touch to it, and they were able to do a lot of really cool creative things. And that's not how they launched the Sportster S, and so I think that kind of speaks to what you're saying, that the Sportster S, you buy it, you enjoy it 90% stock. Yeah. And it's not really the bike that you buy with the intention of swapping out a whole bunch of stuff, just because, let's face it, most of us are going to use like bolt-up parts and things like that, and there's just not a whole lot of parts available for that bike. Yeah, and I think the cool thing too is that outside of a few little things here and there that are nitpicks, for the most part, it's an all-out bike. There's very few bikes that we can say across the entire motorcycle world, but especially even within Harley, that have a unique tank, unique rear fender, unique wheels, a really cool belly pan that runs like the whole length of the bike on the bottom that's painted. Pretty much everything on that bike is unique to that bike, and that's really expensive to do, and it helps, in my mind, kind of justify some of the things where I'm like, I wish the radiator side covers were painted, but with how many things are unique on that bike, I know that bike's not a cheap bike for Harley to make, because there's not a lot of ability for them to utilize those parts elsewhere. And so anytime you can't share a gas tank or share wheels or share a fender, it makes it a lot more expensive to do that, especially on a bike that they know is kind of a halo bike in the Sportster range and is never going to be the volume seller in that particular category. It was really cool to see them do so many unique things, because it would have been so easy to utilize a lot of other parts that they had already utilized. And it's cool that they didn't do that, and they really kind of let their designers go free. So it's I think a bike worth checking out. I think it's a really exciting bike to ride. Not only to look at. It makes me just really excited for what's to come, because the bike's performance is there. Everything about it is fun. The engine is super exciting and dynamic, and I just want to see it in more models. And I feel that sentiment is kind of shared among the larger Harley community. We see people in the comment section saying, put the Rev Max in a bagger and stuff like that. And it would be cool to see the Rev Max platform utilized in different ways. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Nick. Even today we had the launch of the 24 model year, and a lot of people in the comment section, where's the Bronx? Why doesn't Harley come out with the Bronx? And I see that all the time. And I'm like, wow, for such kind of a niche bike, in my mind, being the Bronx, especially in the Harley-Davidson world, there's still a lot of people asking for it. And I don't know if people are asking for it just because it's not here. I mean, I think the Bronx will be a cool bike, but I think it will be kind of like the Sportster S, kind of a niche offering. Yeah. And I guess where I'm going with this is, if that's kind of what you're going for, like a Bronx, maybe you try the Sportster S. And I know it's a completely different style, but at the same time, if you're looking for a Harley-Davidson, a cruiser with that kind of a performance, then you might want to try the Sportster S.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a look.
Yeah.
You know, obviously it's a little bit different in terms of ergonomics, and
Yeah.
you know, it's definitely more of a cruiser vibe.
Right.
But the engine has that character of kind of a naked sport bike, and I feel like when it comes to naked sport bikes, you know, the engine and the engine character is probably one of the most important things. The Sportster S is a lot of fun on a twisty road, and it's got all that character and that charm that you kind of want from a brutish naked sport bike. So definitely worth a check, and definitely exciting to see what's going to come in the rest of the Sportster lineup, because yeah, the bike's just really good. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you stopping by. And, you know, we're going to have a lot of content coming out soon for the rest of the 2024 model lineup. We wanted to get out a few videos on some of the models that are a little bit more of a carryover, but maybe had a significant change in the surrounding models to them, like the Sportster S, because now, you know, last time we reviewed the Sportster S, they were still air-cooled sporties. So, you know, the entire dynamic around the Sportster has changed. But as of today, we've got 24 baggers in, so I'm sure that Matt's going to be having a lot of videos coming out on all that stuff. So stay tuned on the channel. Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, no, just a lot of subject matter that we're going to be coming out with here real soon, talking about the Street Glide and the Road Glide. And the CVOs, the Road Glide ST CVO. So yeah, I appreciate you guys watching. And like always, if you're looking for a new or used Harley-Davidson in Southern California, make sure you hit us up here at Laidlaw's Harley-Davidson. If there's any questions that Nick and I maybe didn't cover directly, then make sure you comment below and ask us. We usually try to get back to everybody in the comment section and answer any questions. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next one. Later.